Guys, this is the kind of interview South Africans need to keep watching on live TV every day, and the wider Africa, because this whole problem with the youth bulge and an increasing unemployment at the same time is actually a ticking time bomb for especially a nation like South Africa with racial inequalities and economic inequalities that actually seem to be one of the most violent, so to speak, in the world. All right. So this former statistician general, really intelligent. I could listen to him all day. Lehotla is actually breaking down why he sees the ANC, in this light, and on why he thinks that unemployment and solving unemployment for this large group of young people is not a priority for the ANC. This is really a shocking thought. Let's quickly listen to him break down this analysis, and I'll be back for a really interesting analysis on this issue.
We sort of set the scene around the unemployment conundrum in South Africa. So let's start there with that unemployment problem. We have fewer people employed in South Africa in the age groups that count in 2024 as compared to 2008 in a growing population of young people. And the reason we're starting there is because that should be the engine room and the labor, the muscle that we can use to power our economy. So explain how you see it.
Well, you started by saying it's the number one priority. Why has it remained stuck for 30 years is a priority? It means it's not a priority. The facts suggest that it is not a priority. Perhaps I could I've got a few slides. Slide number 3 will illustrate this more graphically. In 2008, and they can put that slide number 3 there. In 2008, there were 4.8 million people employed in the age group 25 to 34, 4.8 million. In 2008, there were 1.6 million people employed in the age group 15 to 24. Fast forward to the last quarter of this year, the third quarter of this year. So the third quarter of this year, the numbers are 4.7 million for those who are 25 to 34 and remain 1 million for those who are 15 to 16.
It's gone down.
So now, can you tell me that then youth is a priority in terms of employment? Or is employment a priority at all? Is unemployment, dealing with unemployment a priority? It is not. The evidence suggests otherwise.
Let me just pop in there, Dr. Lehotla. So we're asking our team to show our viewers that slide, which maps the decline over the last the last years since 2008. And again, debunking this idea then that if it had been a priority, we would have at least seen the number shift because the policy, the execution would have supported that goal of prioritization. So it suggests it has not.
Well, the priorities are bankrupt. Yeah. They are devoid of any evidence. They are devoid of any forward-looking process. They are devoid of foresight. Once your policy doesn't have foresight and doesn't have future proof, then it's not worth the paper it is written on. And this is what we are seeing now.
So, again, and we'll bring up those slides as and when we can. So we're trying to build this conversation to show our viewers just the statistical data that underpins, and we should be evidence-based in our responses.
Well, it's rhetoric. Everybody says we are evidence-based, we are numbers-based. We are not. Oh, the slide is up there.
Yeah.
So you can see for the lower part of the bus, or you want me to stand there? I can just...
No, you be seated. Yeah. You can just point, because that's what our viewers are seeing right now.
I see. All right. Yeah. So you see the lower bar here, the lower bars at 25 to 34 and 24 to 15 to 24. The numbers for those, that's where you had over 4.8 million in 2008. The one bar shows 2008, the other one shows 2024. So you are looking at 16 years later, you have fewer people employed in those bars compared to 2008 for those two groups. The only growth that has happened is for those who are 35 and above. So when a young person who is unemployed, I keep rabbits.
Yeah.
When I have not fed them, they eat their young ones.
Wow. I didn't know that about rabbits.
They do. So are cats. So are South Africans.
Wow, that's a powerful
That's
statement.
as profound as this is. We have eaten the future of our children.
Yeah,
Dr.
brilliant, guys. The whole thing with unemployment in South Africa is something that I've been talking a lot about in this channel, and I will be making some offers soon to really start some kind of like skills training for those who will be really interested. So we start up, we on Kwazame here, we might slowly start building up a gang, so to speak, of sort of like business minded people who really have an understanding of starting small businesses and really get to escape this whole mentality of unemployment, because the unemployment level in South Africa is too high. I really don't know if the ANC will be able to solve that. 34, 33%, 32.9 is the official. So, but anyway, this article actually says that, the official unemployment rate in South Africa is 32.9%. And if discouraged workers are included, people who have given up trying to find jobs, the unemployment rate is actually 41.9%. And this is something I saw in one of the comments on this channel that actually said that figure, 33% unemployment rate in South Africa, might be wrong. So in this article now, we're actually seeing that if we add those who have actually given up totally on finding a job in South Africa, given up on the ANC and everything, the official unemployment rate in South Africa should be 41.9%. All right. Now it says that for young people aged 15 to 24, the unemployment rate is 59.7%. That's really, really, really dangerous, because we see that especially the majority of these people, these young people 15 to 24, are black. They're part of the majority, right? And so if we have a 59.7% unemployment among this group, 15 to 24, who have the most potent energy, they have, full of energy and all that, it opens the floor for radicalization. These guys can easily be radicalized. And in the next video I'll be making, Statistician-General here, he argues that this is one of the reasons why he doesn't think peace is achievable in South Africa, because you have a large number, up to 59.7% of young people 15 to 24 who have no jobs. It's a really dangerous place to be for a nation. But anyway, the article then says also that if discouraged workers are included, all right, about 11.2 million South Africans are unemployed. Try to really calculate, out of the larger population of South Africa, 11.2 million are unemployed. Really, it's really scary to think about. But anyway, he said that first, it's important to understand why unemployment in South Africa is so high. All right. There are two main sets of issues to really understand this. Some of them are global issues, and some of them are local issues in South Africa, which are related to the historical circumstances South Africa actually finds itself today. So it says that in order to address this whole unemployment challenge, South Africa and the government of South Africa, hopefully the GNU, will need to engage some new kinds of thinking and an acknowledgement that policies that seem to deregulate the labor market are not a solution. All right. So the deregulation of the labor market, these kind of policies that I had in my last video, that is trying to really reduce, kind of like put policies down that affect businesses that are less than 50 employees. Those kind of regulations might not help, so to speak, according to this article, and we'll think through as we go on. The article here on Conversation says that South Africa requires policies to increase demand for labor. And that means finding a new growth trajectory that is employment intensive. All right. Now, this could also involve much greater public investment in rural areas and also in the townships, and addressing backlogs in infrastructure. All right. Such as transport and, which is really important to link people to the market or products to the markets, as well as promoting the informal economy and also small businesses. All right. Now, it says that South Africa also needs a sort of like a game changer to get the economy onto a labor absorbing path. South Africa today seems not to be at a place where it can absorb labor. There's not, it's like a sponge. When you have a sponge and you put a sponge in water or on a wet surface, it absorbs that. So South Africa has to sort of like have policies that help it operate like a sponge to absorb labor. But today it's not in a place that can absorb labor. And so that's why we see a a rejection of that labor, and that's now feeding the unemployment we're seeing in South Africa. So these are some of the things that are driving this unemployment. Now it speaks of a skill shortage, because now we see that technological advancements is growing. Artificial intelligence, many businesses in South Africa are now employing artificial intelligence to replace many jobs. We're seeing that, but that's one factor we see. We know that a lot of jobs would be lost at the same time. But also, secondly, there has also been this issue with China's incorporation into global production systems, all right? And it has had a large effect on employment across the world. There's a Harvard economics, Richard Freeman. He actually called this the great doubling of the global labor force. In other words, he says that the result has actually been that production now has moved to China and reduced employment elsewhere. So these are factors that are actually impinging on South Africa's unemployment rate, which is already high. But now we see that the whole thing with artificial intelligence coming into the workforce, the labor force, and also China's entrance into the global economy is already worsening the worst, really terrible unemployment situation in South Africa. So how do we now understand the issues and how these things affect unemployment in South Africa? First, it says that one of the most deleterious effects, especially in South Africa, it was that black women were not allowed to live in the cities. All right. And this is actually, first of all, in trying to really diagnose the problem that actually came through the apartheid system. It says, first, how to really understand South Africa's issues are twofold. First of all, the distorting impact of apartheid on the labor system. All right. There are three effects that are worth mentioning. First of all, it says that most black women were not allowed to live in the cities and therefore could not work for wages. Now, under apartheid, most of these women were classified as economically inactive and therefore were not in the labor market. Now, with the end of apartheid, there was now a large increase in women migrating into the urban cities. All right. So that whole bulge of the women that couldn't work in the cities under apartheid, now we come to 1994, we saw that bulge moving on into the urban areas, hopefully to improve their lives and all that. So now in the post-apartheid period, now these women were enumerated now as economically active. Suddenly, people who were not who were termed economically inactive are now suddenly economically active. And since most of them were unable to find work, they swelled the ranks of workers classified as unemployed. So this is how that figure of 39.2 and all that actually seemed to soar. This movement of these women from the townships and from the informal economies into the urban centers is one way to understand the high unemployment rate we see in South Africa. He now said that this move has actually led to a large increase in the official unemployment rate, although many of those women were unemployed in the previous period. They were just not classified as unemployed. Now, in the new regime, with new terms like unemployment and all that, these women now counted as a part of the number that's unemployed now really shoots that above, you see, to that level of 32.9%. Now we say that as highlighted by there's a South African sociologist, his name is Harold Wolff. He actually says that the homelands and the rural areas served as essential, they served essential as spaces for women, children, and retired men to live in without any serious productive economic activity in these areas. Now, homelands were rural areas that the apartheid government demarcated for black people to live in. We know that from South Africa's history. It says that this stripped many of them their right to live in and work without a special pass in. All right, what the government declared at white-only areas and which made up 87% of the country. All right, so we really have to understand this problem as we diagnose unemployment in South Africa. And you remember what I said that even the well-to-do in South Africa. I saw an Indian guy in the comments who actually was really angry when I said that Indians are well-to-do, and he argued that he's poor, so to speak. I know that the whole thing with the divide, so to speak, are actually really sensitive, but I think that the blacks and the colored seem to, and this former statistician general actually breaks down why. In the next video I'll be making, he breaks down why the coloreds and the coloreds and the blacks seem to be much more worse off than the whites and the Indians. Okay, but anyway, we'll get back to that. So it says that the second national issue affecting the job market in South Africa is that while unemployment unemployment has risen and new jobs have been created, the size of the labor force is increasing at a faster rate than the net number of new jobs created. All right. So, what's the solution to this problem? One argument was put forward that, especially arguing that the South African labor market is actually overregulated. There's too much protection for workers, all right, and we see that in I see the unions in South Africa are really strong, all right. So these people that argue here now that there's too much protection for workers and wage levels are too high for employers, so at the end of the day employers get discouraged and probably and decide to leave. I'm making another video soon. It says that I think 35,000 South Africans have actually changed their tax residency from South Africa, which actually means that this is a loss of almost 5 billion rand. So I'll make the next video will be that you guys should stay tuned and watch that, because it's really important to understand the ramifications going forward, especially if you live in South Africa. You gotta open your ears now. So it says that an additional argument is that workers' skills do not match what is needed by employers. One of the guys of the leader of the Bosa party, Musi Maimane, actually argues that, and I really thought this was really interesting for me. He said that it's not just the fact that South Africans are unemployed, but they are unemployable, because the skills that are really needed in the marketplace doesn't match the skills that are available. And so there's that huge gap that ends up causing a redundancy both in the workplace and also in the labor space. So it's really a complex issue that really needs some creativity on how to solve at the level of the government, especially of the GNU now. So it says that all of these see the problem on the supply side of the labor market. That is, unemployment is caused by workers expecting a wage that is too high, while the labor market, no, first of all, let's go back. It says that unemployment is caused by workers expecting a wage that is too high, not having the right skills, and expecting too much protection. I love that. It's we really have to break that down. So unemployment in South Africa, first of all, one problem according to this article is that wage is too high. All right, that causes employers to really struggle on how to really keep up with that wage, and probably this is one of the reasons that's feeding this whole informal economy, like hiring Zimbabweans who are undocumented and all that, so that the wages can actually be reduced, because wages is actually something that is high in South Africa according to this article. Secondly, a large portion of the labor force do not have the right skills. So when the employer probably, for example, needs a guy to work statistical analysis on Excel spreadsheet and all that, those skills are not available in the South African labor force. They might be available in an external economy, in Finland, in Switzerland, in Europe, in the US, but in South Africa, they're not there. So at the end of the day, this employer needs to grow his profit, but at the same time, the skills to enable him get that profit aren't in South Africa. And at the end of the day, he ends up, hiring freelancers and all that from outside, increasing the unemployment problem in South Africa. And finally, the workers in South Africa, when they're eventually employed, they expect a lot of protection from the unions. And so these are kind of like the triangular issues that actually are affecting this whole problem of unemployment in South Africa. Really, really interesting, really brilliant. So it says that proponents of this view, they argue that reducing protection and reducing wages will allow the labor market to clear, and actually unemployment will fall. So these are kind of like solutions, but I'm sure that unions in South Africa will never allow to the reduction of the minimum wage and reduction of, this protection for workers. So these are very complex problems, really complex problems. It says there are a number of reasons why this kind of strategy would not work. First of all, it ignores the country's history and trends. Secondly, depressing wages is not politically feasible and will lead to a growing inequality in South Africa. And thirdly, it underplays the key issue, which is the economy. That even when the economy is growing, it is generating fewer jobs than the increase in the labor force. All right, so it's possible for an economy to grow, but then it grows while not producing jobs or generating jobs. All right, and then even if it produces jobs, it produces fewer jobs in comparison to the large labor market. And so I think this is the case of South Africa. Really sad, really sad. But anyway, what are some solutions? Because in Kwazami here in 2025, we'll be talking a lot about solutions and have a solution-oriented mentality. We've been talking about the problems for too long, but we now have to start thinking and talking about more in terms of solutions. All right. So what could be some solutions? Now, this article goes on to say, first of all, what might be a policy package that could address unemployment in South Africa? First, the economy has to shift to a growth pattern that increases the demand for labor. All right. Some elements of this would include much greater public investment in rural areas and townships to generate better economic integration in these areas and then boost the demand for labor. All right. Some examples of these kinds of investments are in transport systems, in telecommunication systems, and also systems that promote exports. All right. So the township is actually the one major area that the ANC, the GNU now will have to think about how to really boost township economy and all that, because it's part of one of the areas that this whole regeneration of the conditions that replenish the conditions for unemployment continuously persist. Then it also says that more accommodating macroeconomic policies are actually needed, especially from the level of government. So essentially, public expenditure and taxation, and also monetary policies such as interest rate policies that promote employment intensive growth is actually really important. South Africa's monetary policies have actually focused on reducing inflation. There's been a much more focus on how do we reduce inflation. And what is inflation? Inflation is the increase of the money supply in an economy. And what causes that increase? There's much more of lending. There's an increase in money supply circulating the economy. And the more the currency increases, the prices naturally follow that to be able to soak up that sponge, so to speak. And at the end of the day, when the people living in that economy are unable to afford these high prices due to the increase in circulation of economy, then we see what we call inflation and lots of depression and depressed citizens. All right. So here it argues that South Africa's monetary policies have actually been focused on reducing inflation through high interest rates. So in order to soak up that high volume of money in circulation, South Africa's monetary policies have increased interest rates so that it can take in all of that excess currency in circulation. But at the end of the day, people do not even have the money or the jobs, so to speak, to be able to afford the impact of that increase. That's the rise of bread, the rise of daily utilities and all that. And so it says here that high interest rates might attract capital to South Africa, but they do very little to encourage firms to invest in production and related activity, which then create jobs. So what eventually creates jobs is production. And if you listen to my last video where Prince Mashele argues the presence of those warehouses where he sees when he moves across South Africa, it actually speaks to the fact that South Africa is no longer producing. There are no factories producing, and that's where the jobs count. So there's been much more importation and all that. And at the end of the day, this actually kind of like contributes to this whole high unemployment rate we see in South Africa. So it says that the country's macro policies also should be focused on promoting investment by firms to generate employment. All right. So there has to be much more investment by firms so that people can be employed and then all that. But this is not to suggest that inflation control is not important, but a better focus on employment is also needed. All right. So at the end of the day, the whole thing to grow an economy is all about business. There has to be investment, there has to be growth, there has to be a growth mindset, but also in a really strategic way so that it doesn't also explode, so to speak, at the level of inflation or the balance of inflation and what we now see as recession. Yes. All right. So it says that also South Africa's informal economy is small compared to its peers. All right. Policies for greater public investment in marginalized areas will also help to boost informal whites. I spoke about this, about the informal economy in South Africa. It's something I'm also really slowly studying and trying to understand. It's really large. So South Africa can do well to invest in the informal economy because there's a large population there, and that's brewing this whole number of unemployment and unemployed people. A lot of investment in that area would really also help. Then, yeah, so these are actually some of the solutions. It also speaks about, finally, anyway, investment in renewables and also related production which require clean energy. So, to take advantage of the country's high natural advantages. So, we know that South Africa has a lot of these renewable energy materials and all that. But then, this transition from coal to renewable is something that has to be a gradual shift, because that transition will cost a lot of jobs already in the coal powered industries that actually have led South Africa to where it is. So that transition has to be slow and strategic. But also, investment in this area is also key to really start producing new opportunities for new jobs in the renewable energies area, especially the fact that South Africa is really rich in this raw material. It says that there are two components to this: manufacturing all the inputs for rolling out renewables, and also using clean energy to produce goods that are classified green goods. So South Africa can actually be a major player in the production of green goods, and then we could see much more jobs in that area, because that's actually kind of like the energy of the future, so to speak. And so that transition could actually be a solution to this whole problem of unemployment, especially for the youth age 15 to 24 in South Africa. So I don't know, we'll be stopping here. I don't want this video to be too long. What do you guys think? I think it was a really intelligent one from former statistician general Hotla. But share your thoughts. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments.